Hey everybody, Tall Trey here for another episode of Comedy Manners, and today we're talking about etiquette. I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm your co-host, Aazalea, Renee.
And we're joined here today by...
What's that? we didn't prep that. I'm Jamie Helms.
So, sit back, relax, and let's learn a little something about etiquette.
I have opinions.
Today with Jamie Helms. And Jamie, let's talk a little bit about you. You have a very interesting job in the comedy space.
Yeah, when it comes to comedy, I'm a professional bartender. I manage and bartend at the venue that is now the longest running show continually in Middle Georgia, Reboot Retrocade and Bar. It's a super interesting room from a comedy perspective because it's fucking loud. You know, we have all those vintage arcade machines and we don't turn them off for the show. You know, so it gets loud as fuck every month.
Yeah, by all outward aspects, Reboot should not work. And the only reason it does is because the people in the comics want it to.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing with all of our events that I've noticed, because we do a lot of other kind of events. And the events that die off in that venue are the ones that people don't apply consistent pressure to. Like, everything that we do, if you don't do it even when you have an empty room, like, you will never earn a crowd in that venue. It's got to be consistent. It has to happen in the same schedule, you know, whatever, if you're doing weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever, it's got to be the same revolving rotation, because there's so many other variables and elements to that room that you have to have consistency.
Yeah, you know? I call it programming the crowd. You have to do it same bat time, same bat channel. That way people know, oh, it's time.
Yeah, and I was talking with somebody at the bar the other day about this. They were asking about the comedy shows because they were wanting to go up, but they've never gone up on an open mic before. And they were asking for like tips or whatever, because that was the first room I ever attempted comedy at. And the most interesting about that room to me is that you can't hear anything, and that means you can't listen for laughs. You have to look for laughs. You have to like either pick somebody in the crowd that you know has a great sense of humor and watch them to see if your shit is landing, or you just have to scan the crowd and make a lot of uncomfortable eye contact. And that's the scariest part for a lot of people. You know, like, everybody's greatest fear is public speaking. It's because people are looking at you. So I've seen a lot of people get cold feet in that room really, really hard.
Yeah. I know one of the most off-putting things when I first did that was I couldn't hear anybody laughing. Mm-hmm. And then when I got off stage, everybody was like, you killed it. Like, you were awesome. And I'm like, I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
because I can't hear any like feedback or whatever. But like, yeah, it's true that venue, like, on paper shouldn't work, but it does.
Well, I think it's due in large part to the efforts of Trey and how consistent Trey is, and you know, Trey's a great networker and is able to produce these shows and pull in people from states away, you know, who are features, and like, you'd be like, wait, you got who to come down for this show? And honestly, all of the people who feature normally are awesome. Like, they're great people, they're great comics, and they will drive hours out of their way just to come to this show that they honestly know is not like on the main beat. Like, it's not a room that people play to work on bits or work on the sets to like take anywhere. Like, it's not a workshop room. It's just a Wild West kind of area. But people love it.
Well, in a good way. Like, it is one of the best crowds, even if you can't hear them. Like, I wish I had recorded so many of my sets there, just because everybody's on the edge of their seat. They're there for it, and they are having a good time.
Yeah, and I think because it's such an unorthodox venue, and part of the like upper management team and owner's vision of making it a very welcoming environment, like, I'll get more compliments playing in that room than any other room. Like, usually you do a show, maybe you kill it, whatever. One or two people walk up and be like, hey, that was an awesome set. And usually one of them is a comic. That show ends, and literally every time we do it, people who don't know me and aren't comics and they just wandered into an arcade bar and happened to stay for the show by like the tens or dozens of people will walk up and be like, that shit was awesome. And they go and do that to every single comic.
Yeah.
It's a very welcoming environment for sure.
It is. We started this podcast because a lot of comics are like, well, what do I do? How do I do this? And
Right.
I love comics. I'll do everything I can for them, but doing the same class every 3 months for them, as opposed to just being like, here's a podcast.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely so for me, it's a hobby. Like, comedy's not anything that I want to pursue as any form of income whatsoever, because I would absolutely hate to have to do a show. You know what I mean? To be obligated or have my responsibilities tied to doing a show. It's too fun for me to lock it down like that. And anytime I'm not feeling it or I'm not having fun, I don't want to go up on stage. You know, I don't want to have to do that. So everything that I say on this episode is flavored from the perspective of somebody who's not trying to make it in comedy. Like, I just enjoy it. I really enjoy the craft. I enjoy comedians because they're such wild individuals and loud personalities. But there are a lot of things that you just, either somebody comes alongside you and coaches you, or you just have to kind of pick them up and learn as you trial and error. And the thing about any performing art is your trial and error, usually like your error results in you getting booed or, you know, like just sucking a fat bag on stage. Like, and when I was trying to do music years ago, I bombed doing music. So I'm not afraid of bombing doing comedy now, because I've already been through like the worst. People have walked up to me and grabbed my guitar neck and be like, dude, please stop. Like, I've gone through the worst reaction possible.
Was that at the church you worked at, or?
No. Now, interestingly enough, though, that you bring it up, a lot of the etiquette that I've learned as a comic did actually come from my brief attempt at a ministry career. Just a lot of how you work with a crowd. Because in the church world, like, a big part is the speaking and it is like the preaching. That's by far the smallest part of working in a church. There's so much more to it, but that's one of the most critical pieces. And they call it there's this thing, excuse me, I'm imbibing. There's this thing that preachers talk about called the 18-inch gap or the 3-foot gap. And it's the space.
Is that the space they need between the choir boys?
No, no, they unfortunately don't have that rule yet. But no, it's the space between the lip of the stage and the first chair in the first row. And if you can it's called crossing the gap, because you're looking to get people bought into what you're saying. So if you can cross that gap, and there's all kinds of different tools and resources to do that, different techniques that I've pulled into comedy pretty hard.
Now, when you say cross that gap, do you mean physically walk across it?
So preachers will do it sometimes, but it's really a metaphor for just keeping people bought in and keeping people's attention. And there's like TED Talks about public speaking, and, you know, that go over a lot of the same kind of things, but it's essentially just the ability to keep people bought into what you're saying. In the church world, it's more difficult because usually people, you know, you have like a solid hour of people's attention, and 20 minutes of that is for music, and then the rest of that is going to be for teaching. After about 30 minutes, people don't give a damn what you were saying. They gotta go. They gotta go get the kid out of the nursery, or they gotta make it to lunch. Their football game is on. But in comedy, you get about an hour and a half.
No, you get 90 minutes.
Yeah.
That is an hour and a half. Sorry, math is not my strong suit.
Yeah, you get about an hour and a half. And I think that's because, though, when you're doing a show, whether it's an open mic or a fully booked and produced show, every different comedian has a different personality and ideally different jokes, and there's different things. It's like watching, you know, several different acts.
Yeah, and that goes into pacing as well as just putting the show together.
Right.
Because you don't want fast comic,
mm-hmm.
and then Stephen Wright. Like, that wouldn't
Right.
that wouldn't flow well. You
Yeah.
gotta know who to put where. And that's why a lot of times you'll do like an open mic, like Reboot, where there's a list. I got a pretty good feel of how everybody's pace is and
Right.
where the highs and lows will be. And I don't go by the list. That is a guideline.
Right.
And, you know, don't get mad if somebody changes it out. Like,
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing with absolutely any performative art that has the accessibility of a sign-up sheet. Like, your producer, your DJ, whoever, like, if somebody bombs, they need the ability to pull up somebody that they're familiar with and know is a killer, Because if you lose the room 2 comics in a row, the whole show is
you got to restart the crowd. And if somebody kills, you definitely don't want to throw the brand new comic afterwards. Right. That's that high and low. You got to gradually go up, gradually go down.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a thing that I found with pretty much any stage related or performative arts. That I didn't do comedy until 2019, but I've been addicted to being on a stage since high school, since I was like 17. I started doing theater that year. It was my junior year of high school, so way late bloomer to get into anything artistic. I was not artistic at all. And I took a drama class because my friend was in there, and then we did our first show, and I vividly remember, one, being terrified. Like, there's a picture of me somewhere on the internet, the first time I'm ever on a stage, and my entire face and neck is like lobster red because I'm petrified in there. But I remember after that show, like, the feeling of like elation, endorphins rushing. It was like better than any, substance you could do, better than any other experience. And it's never been all these people are looking at me, that's exciting thing. No, that's the terrifying part. There's just something magical about performing to a crowd that is really hard to put into words. It's very similar to, like, if you're a musician and you get proficient enough in your instrument that you play with somebody else who's also that level of proficiency, and you guys can just jam without saying anything to each other at all.
Yeah.
You're communicating without words. And performing anything, any performative art, you are using words, but that's not the true method of communication. Mm-hmm. Like with comedy, it's, hey, isn't this thing absurd? And when they laugh, they're saying, yeah, that is absurd. And it's this constant kind of back and forth until people start talking back at the comic, which
it happens. It's dealing with hecklers, which we'll go over in another episode. But all right, let's go around. What is your Mount Rushmore of comics?
Oh man, I did not expect that question. Shoot. So somebody asked me the other day who I think the greatest comic of all time is, which is always a controversial question. And I could only boil it down to an either or. Mm-hmm. And for 2 very different reasons. It's either, to my mind, it's either Dave Chappelle or George Carlin. And Dave Chappelle's in the running because he's the only person who's ever, one, walked away from millions of dollars, but also just walked away from comedy for a decade, and then just decided to come back and immediately started killing. Hadn't lost any chops. Like, in fact, and a lot of his bits were even better. I don't agree with a lot of his political views, but that ability and that proficiency with the craft is impressive. Carlin, because there's not a comic selling out theaters today that isn't inspired by him. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. When you're so honest and funny, the CIA has a file on you, you know you're doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that reflects in, like, his role in Kevin Smith's movie. I can't remember which one it is, but he plays a hitchhiker because Jay and Silent Bob are trying to hitchhike. Right? I think it is Dogma. They're trying to hitchhike, and nobody's stopping for him. And he's like, I'll show you guys how it's done. And he gets in the truck and just immediately starts slobbing on the trucker's knob. And Kevin Smith tells this story about how the day of shooting, George walked up to him and was like, so how'd this guy get to this point? And Kevin's like, what do you mean? Like, thought he was joking. And George is like, no, like, what events led up to this guy having to to throw dick in order to get around the country? And Kevin was like, I don't know, man. I just thought it was a funny bit. But he approached that role with such authenticity that, I think that really shows in his comedy as well.
Well, that whole movie had an all-star cast as well.
Absolutely did. So yeah, I mean, Chappelle and Carlin are up there for me. On it, like, personally, I got a lot of bad takes, bad picks. I think that the best special ever to be put to film, to me, like, for me, is Vicious Circle, Dane Cook. I know it's like borderline hacky, but the mastery behind his ability to, like, that special was clippable. Like, you could take 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds of those bits and just put them on the internet and they would work. And so he, like, mastered going viral before it even existed as a thing, which, that he's credited for being this big MySpace guy. So, like, I won't put his face on Rushmore, but if I could put that special on Rushmore, I would.
Okay.
And then a good 4th pick. this would be easier if I knew anything about the presidents that are on the mountain. I know there's Washington.